introduction about, and then the second one is about the area that we're going to walk, which is like from here all the way down to Aviation Way and then back up the hill. I'm glad you all have comfortable walking shoes on. And one of the first things I wanted to show you was a storm drain. That's at the end of the block. So we'll go slightly out of order, and we're going to go look at this parking lot.
Grace, we don't have the slides, so maybe you could describe what's on the slides when you talk about them.
Okay, right. So in the slide about the parking lot, when we built this environment, when we built this area, LA was like very prone to floods, flash floods when it rained. And so the thinking was to move that water off as fast as possible. And we learned now that that was a mistake. But we already have this built environment that is like designed to move water off as quick as possible. So, but it turns out where it's going to be expensive to rip everything up and start over. But that doesn't mean we can do better. We can't do better. We can make minor improvements. Like when you look at the slope of this parking lot, like everything to the left of here is going into the street, but everything to the right of here is going to end up over here. And when this converted from a donut shop to a credit union, the credit union asked the city for permission to institute tandem parking. And tandem parking lets them preserve the number of required parking spaces, but build this area over here, where the water is channeled over here into this rock bed, and it waters these flax and ice plant and things that don't really require that much water. So by doing this, they don't deal with the erosion that you would normally do on a slope, and they capture all of that polluted runoff off of the parking lot, or at least off of 2/3 of it. And 2/3 is better than zero. So, but they did it very cheaply, and all they needed was like one little zoning change. What are they called when you get an exception from a zoning change?
A variance?
Yeah, all it required was a variance to like do something that's good for a watershed. And don't be afraid to ask for a variance if you're doing something that's good for all of us.
I thought it was a bride.
And another thing about this is who's talking?
Oh, sorry.
There's actually a group that gives classes on how to do this, and they're landscape architects that specialize in doing this. I've been on many of their tours. They pre-COVID, they used to give a class on how to create a rain garden over at like the Torts Community Center. Or you could just hire a landscaping company and say, this is what I want. And a lot of them already have certifications and studied it. Because there's also a list of plants. There's a list of plants that are good at sequestering what the stuff that comes off of the parking lot has heavy metals. It has zinc from the tires, it has copper from the brake pads, it has platinum palladium from your tailpipe. And there are certain plants that are really good at sequestering heavy metals like that. So, and then you can't put it in your green bin because that you put it into your garbage. But anyway, these are not. Whoever did this wasn't paying attention to which plants are good at sequestering. Like the one at the library, they really knew what they were doing. But that was a bigger budget.
Hey, Jill, thank you for joining us. We have someone on Facebook. Jill Hogue is watching. Yeah, so we need to be close to you so we can hear you.
Oh, you see this clean up after your dog sign? I'm glad that my neighbor put this sign up because the LA area exceeds EPA allowable standards in 3 different areas. One was heavy metals, which I told you about. The other one was coliform bacteria. And we thought we solved it with pooper scooper laws. Because like if you don't scoop the poop, it ends up like running into the waterways, and then there's a lot of bacteria in it. But we went from, we solved the dog poop problem, and we know that we solved it because our wet season coliform bacteria count went down to near 0. We're doing a good job, keep it up. The problem is our homelessness problem. Our dry season coliform bacteria is now high because homeless are encamping near rivers and waterways. And so we're continuing to exceed the allowable thresholds of coliform bacteria, but for a different reason. All right.
We're on Blossom Ave in Redondo Beach. We started at Blossom and Artesia. Grace, how did you come up with this idea for this water walkabout?
I was a government scientist at 2 different national labs, and I knew what the technical scientists are different because we run towards the unknown, whereas everyone runs towards certainty. We run towards the unknown because we want to understand. And we want to understand what we understood just wasn't getting out to the public. Right? And the government, as a scientist, we tell government these are the things that I think with our problems, but these are our potential solutions. And yet we're not doing them. We're not doing them because there's no political will, there's no public clamoring, and people don't change their, people don't update their priors because things have changed a lot, not just with climate change, but with, not just with climate change, but with the way that we've engineered our environment. Like for instance, it says no dumping, drains to ocean. And when I grew up in the 70s, we saw this everywhere, right? That's what we learned. It runs into the ocean. And in this watershed, it does not. But we're still using the same stencil.
It's still a good idea not to dump.
It's a good idea not to dump. But we have to update our priors because this area only drains towards the ocean in an indirect way.
And then is it filtered? So
yes. If you...
Yeah, you might want to repeat because of the people that just showed up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I talked about the importance of updating your priors because with climate change, everything's changing. But also our built environment, the system, the water energy system that we're in, it changes almost every year. So it's important to update your priors. And that's one of the things that I have to...
What is a prior?
A prior is your assumption about how things work.
Okay.
like you call that a prior?
Yeah, because it drains the ocean, but only very indirectly. But you still should not dump any stuff in. And I'm going to show you why later.
Where does this go?
That's what this water walk is about. I saw this. I was listening to a talk by a prominent environmentalist who said that, have you walked your watershed? And I was a mom with a young kid, and I thought, oh, this is a cute thing I'll do with my kid. And then as I walked my watershed and I started looking at stuff, it just kept unraveling and there was more and more. And if you back up a little bit, I have a BS in chemistry and a BA in math and then a PhD in physics. And so when I worked in a couple government labs, I always worked in weather and climate data and helping to assess risk, whether it's for the military or for government or the private sector. I was always assessing like risk from weather and climate for people. So as I was a mom with a stroller walking through our neighborhood, like I was able to figure out what I should be looking at. And then I realized, you know, this is a great story and people need to know this, right? I hope you find it interesting.
It is so, but where does the water go?
She's going to tell us. We actually have, LA is fortunate in that we're a young city, and so it's kind of bad that we're built around cars, but it's also good that we have we have what's called a sanitary sewer. That means our toilet water and our storm water is separated in different systems. And that is not the case in Chicago, is not the case in New York or any of the eastern cities. And what's terrible is that, like, Houston has no excuse. Houston's a young city and they built a sanitary sewer, but they undersized it for the stormwater. So what they end up with is a combined system with all the pollution problems, even though they made that decision to deliberately undersize it because they sized it for what taxes they thought would fly instead of what the scientists told them, this is the rain that we're going to expect. And now they're paying the price for it. So, like, I hope that we do not make the same mistakes here. Our system is sized appropriately. I've gone out looking after like an inch of rain, and it's working. Oh, Sally was my former boss at one of the National Lampoons.
Welcome, Sally.
Hi, Sally. Sally. It's been a while since I've seen you, Ness.
Oh,
Oops.
Margie.
Margie, I didn't recognize you when you met.
I need to be near you.
Okay. I know that. Yeah. I told you, people are interested. When they flush their toilet, it goes away by magic. When they open their tap, water flows out by magic. But someone did that. That's really important that we demystify it.
Well, and I think you were talking about how when you started doing your own little water walkabout, you started discovering more and more things that needed to be addressed and researched. That's what a scientist does, right?
Right. I mean, scientists are born and then we're trained to further be that way.
Yeah.
We're born because we're naturally curious and we run towards uncertainty.
And our community is so lucky to have somebody like you who's so knowledgeable and can help all of us understand the importance of water conservation and where it comes from and how to do that.
So there's actually whole social media accounts that are based around taking pictures of manhole covers, which are now, I don't know, they're just like, we're trying to use gender neutral terms. So I'm not sure what you call these.
That's funny.
Covers. These are access holes.
Yeah.
And
Manhole covers.
right.
Can't
So
say man.
Our Nelson Avenue is the sewer main for this whole area.
Oh.
Our sewage treatment. Remember, we have a sanitary sewage system. So this is not the stormwater. This is a sewage system. It gets collected and it goes down these sewage mains and it gets treated over in Carson.
Wow. That's a long way.
Right.
Hump the hill? Like, how does it move up and down? If they pump
We're
they
going
pump
to.
it. Oh, you're gonna. Okay, sorry. Getting ahead of ourselves.
Right. What?
So it goes that way.
They got to get it that way because this area mostly goes downhill towards the Dominguez. It goes downhill to the Dominguez channel, but it needs a little bit of help. And there are pumps along the way called lifting stations.
Right.
And we're gonna go, and then this area, which is a low-lying area, really needs a lot of help because this is a 13-degree pitch.
Yeah, it's mighty. I wouldn't want to ride my bike.
There's like the 40-foot lifting station every few hundred yards is not going to do it.
So
They need.
down is this then? Is it right under
Here
the
comes the
surface?
car.
It's under the street. Artesia has a lot of stuff running under it. And remember, the streets are public right away. And so a lot of utility cables and stuff are doing it. But the sewer is important enough that they want to put it well away from everything else, because this is something that's just too important to mess up.
How deep is it?
In the new slide deck that I showed you, there's a picture of these guys replacing our water main, and so you can see how big it is. And when I saw the guys doing it, I asked them, oh, there's a car coming here. When I saw the guys doing it, I asked them, are you making it bigger? And he goes, no, we're just replacing it. And I said, oh, did it leak? And they said, no, we just know from the age of it, it's time to replace it before failing.
So if it was a private industry, they wouldn't replace it. They'd wait till it broke.
No, Cal Water is private.
Oh, they are. Okay.
DWP, which is public, actually has more deferred maintenance than we do. So different government structures do not need to have good.
Yeah, it has to be funded, and
It
you
has
have to
be
make sure they do their
funded,
job right.
And you have to have people that care about
Yeah.
doing a good job. You have to have people that understand why their water rates cannot be rock bottom today, because you're just kicking it down the line. So if you go to the Cal Water website, you can see they have a page where they talk about infrastructure improvements, and ones that we're about to start, ones we just finished, and you can see this map, and they have gone through, and they have like worked on water mains, and they have worked on sewage mains. And one of the things that you'll notice is that like sewage needs help flowing downhill. Flowing back up the hill. But people at the top of the hill, like certain parts of the beach cities, they have very little water pressure. So before, like people just kind of live with really crummy, or they had to buy a private pump system to pump it up. But Cal Water has made community pumps, so every high-lying neighborhood around here now has adequate water pressure.
Are water tanks part of that or not? Just pumps
Yeah,
invisible?
because you pump up the water into the tank, you fill it, and then right.
It's like having a water tower, right? Sort of is.
Yeah. But for them, it's like a pump system. But if you did have the space for a water tower, that's great, because then it's like gravity fed. But high-lying neighborhoods need help with water pressure for clean water. Low-lying neighborhoods need help getting the sewage up and away. Because what used to happen in the low-lying neighborhood was that whenever we had electricity outages, do you remember in 2005 or 2000 we had outages? The pumps stopped working. And people had raw sewage coming up from their shower drains in this low-lying neighborhood. And there's a fix for that, and I'm going to show you this fix. So I'm just telling you, DWP uses coal, and Southern California Edison does not. DWP has deferred maintenance, Cal Water does not. You just have to pay attention and apply pressure.
So what's your take on the desalination plant? Are you going to talk about that at all?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
What is CSD?
That is like
California
an old
Sewer
water
Department?
agency.
Okay.
But Cal Water is different now.
Yeah, it's been taken over.
In fact, Cal Water has been taking over struggling water agencies with deferred maintenance problems all over the state. They're like juggernaut that keeps growing because they're willing to do the repairs that the smaller agencies won't do.
Yeah, they're going to get a payoff at some point.
Yeah.
We just had a presentation from Cal Water at NRBBA on Thursday.
Right. I mean, one of the reasons they're growing is they're really, they promise to do maintenance and they do it.
That's great. That benefits all of us.
Oh, yeah.
So now, people who are watching our Facebook Live, you can see we're going down a pretty steep hill. Grace said it's a 13% grade. And she's going to show us how our sewage actually runs uphill and how that can happen. So, I used to live on Nelson, and I used to walk by, I think, where we're going all the time, and I never knew what it was.
Oh,
so I'm pretty excited to learn about, there are so many things that are behind bushes and stuff that we drive by all the
They're
time.
underground.
Yeah.
And like whenever they dig up the ground, I'm like the crazy lady that runs up and asks them, "What you doing? What you doing? Can I watch?"
I've never been on the street this way or something. Or I must have driven it.
I don't think I've been
I'm
in this
seeing
area.
it with new eyes.
Yeah.
There's this thing called steward socialism. Yeah, because people talk about how government get out of the way, blah blah blah. Government is a problem, but none of us can take care of our sewage or our water needs alone. We have to work together, and that's steward socialism.
So seeing what's going on in Culver, like as you get to Culver City, you know, wow.
Oh, yeah.
So we're pretty much at rock bottom for this neighborhood, and all the sewage runs downhill into this holding tank. I can feel it. I can hear it. I can hear it.
There's movement.
So there's, and if you were to run a pump 24/7 uphill to the sewage main, it would just drive the people nuts. So what they do is they wait until it fills up to a certain point, and then they turn on the pump, get it up there, and then they shut it off. You know, that way we're not a noise burden for the whole neighborhood.
So they're putting it that way?
Yeah, they're pumping it up the hill this way and then up towards the main, and then once it goes up the main, they're pumping it up there.
Do they try to avoid the nighttime hours, or just whenever it gets full, they just?
The guy that was servicing this area did not tell me, but he was servicing this area because, do you see that? That's the vent hole for the sewage gases.
Okay.
So, but there's like a filter so that sewage gases aren't like so noxious for the people that live here. And then there's a pump over here.
So this looks like something temporary for construction. Are you saying it's permanent?
Apparently they open it periodically to clean it out.
Okay, because it looks like they just did some.
Yes, they did.
They
replaced
relayed
the
pipe?
sewage main.
Okay.
They replaced the sewage main.
Okay.
Is that so? Is that porta potty there all the time, or is there because they're doing special work?
You know,
Are they here often
moved
enough?
it here. They moved it here, and they used to move it away, but it's been here for a while. I guess, you know, like during COVID, you couldn't find an open public restroom. I don't know why, but whenever they're doing construction, they have to have a porta potty, and they used to haul it away, and now they're not. Is this yeah.
What? I love it. Yeah. And it's nice to actually get out and have people around. What are these creatures?
So we can see all of the fresh pavement here, and it actually ends right here.
Yeah, this is where they were working on the sewage main and replacing old sections.
Wow.
No, I'm one of the people that tell me. I see you.
Like whenever I see people working on my street, I'm super excited. I can't wait to park my car and walk over here because I want to know what they're doing, and it's just reassuring.
And that, again, is the inquisitive scientist in you, right?
Right. Well,
The rest of us just say, oh man, I have to drive around the block now.
right. And I was pretty excited by the changes happening over here.
Yeah, they did such a nice job with the landscaping and everything too.
Like, yeah, you didn't even notice.
I know it's not.
Well, like I said, I used to live on this street, so I remember when they were working on it, and I was really, actually they dug up this whole neighbor's yard and replaced their whole front yard with a beautiful yard.
So, you see this diesel fuel? So this area has diesel fuel and an emergency generator, so that whenever the electricity goes out, the sewage doesn't back up. And that is something that we did since I moved in here. Right, like 20 years ago, people used to worry about sewage coming up from the ground, and because we together built this system, we helped make this area more livable for the people who live in a low-lying area, and that's sewer socialism.
And this is, the we is
There
county
is
sanitation
a
districts.
see, yeah. There's a green line pumping plant. So that's this.
Uh-huh.
So there's a pump there's a pump, there's a generator, there's fuel to run the generator. So if we have an earthquake and we're unable to get electricity for weeks at a time, these people were not going to have sewage backing up.
Oh, thank goodness.
That's very important.
Yeah.
Because there are some things that you cannot fail, right?
Well, gosh, can you examine my neighborhood?
Well, I walk in this neighborhood a lot.
Yeah.
And I used to walk down, my daughter used to go to the daycare center, and I used to walk her down in a stroller, and then when I'm not in a hurry, and then walk around the corner, and then take the bus to work. And so I was really attuned to things that change on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So all the stuff that comes off of the storm drain, it comes over here. It comes into this collection. You see this collection area here, and then the original thing that I was telling you about is called first flush, and that's the first quarter inch of rain. It's got all the crud. It's got your oil. It's got all the stuff shed by cars, all the stuff from air pollution, called like dry and wet deposition. All that stuff ends up in your rain. And it gets washed into the storm drain system. So the first layer, the first roughly quarter inch of rain, gets pumped into the sewage main, and it goes to the sewage plant to be treated as a dangerous thing that it is. And then the stuff after that, well, all of it gets screened. There's screens under there that you can't see, but all of it gets screened, and then it goes through some filters to get out like the larger particles, and it goes down the hill to what's called a spreading ground over here, and we have a small spreading ground over here. Yeah.
We need to get back to pedestrian friendly. Yes. Pedestrian friendly.
Just to see what's there.
Well, it's behind the fence. They don't want people messing with it for good reason.
Yep.
There's a car. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing, yeah. Are you here for the water walk? It's a water walkabout. It's a League of Women Voters water walkabout. We're looking at our water infrastructure.
So Grace, would almost everyone just find something like this in their neighborhood if they
have
look
to.
hard enough? Yeah.
They have to because of the ocean runoff rules. There are areas
Seeing things we don't normally see when we're on a water walk.
It's very sad that the residents of Hermosa rejected a project that would help them. But that's the thing, we have to create public pressure to do the things that are scientifically sound.
Yep.
We really can't change physics, but we can improve our technology, and we have to push public opinion to trust scientists when we talk about
Do we need to slow down a little bit?
Yeah, we're gonna wait.
Yeah, this is a pretty steep hill.
Yeah.
So even though the county tells us not to go in the ocean after a rain for a couple of days,
It's because of the other areas that haven't done what we've
I
done.
see. Okay. Get some hill walking.
Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, this is really loud. This is really loud, so maybe we'll talk over here where it's more quiet. A little bit quieter over here. So behind that ivy-covered fence is a spreading ground. It's a small spreading ground that serves this watershed. So, like this whole area, which is pretty much like all of District 5 and parts of District 4 in Redondo Beach, it drains over here, gets screened and filtered, gets sent over here, except for the stuff that went in the sewage system, like it says. And there's a spreading ground, which is a sloped plant. It's a sloped pan with so that the water can soak deep into the ground. And we put it in low-lying areas because water flows downhill. But this, it's hard to do. It's hard to do percolation to the aquifer that we drink because there's so much in this whole LA basin. There's so much fine clay, like the soil is very fine. You may call it clay soil, but so it's not hydrologically linked to the deep aquifer that we get water from. So when you do infiltration into the ground, you're helping to send water into the root zone, which is great because that means that we need to do less irrigation of the trees, but it's not going to help us with our drinking water problem because they're two related but slightly different problems. But infiltration will help you with the runoff pollution. It will help you with reduce your reliance on water. It will make you, and eventually it makes its way to the ocean. And because it just seeps underground, this plume of fresh water. First came to this area, they were at Bayona Creek. They were afraid. They rowed boats to the mouth of Bayona Canyon, right up by Bayona Creek, right by in Santa Monica Bay. They dipped buckets and they skimmed fresh water off the surface of Santa Monica Bay. Because we had so much fresh water flowing underneath the soil that if it wasn't too windy, if the water surface was still, you actually had a layer of fresh water on top. And because of the way we've engineered this area, that's no longer true. It's as saline right at the beach as it is deep out in the ocean.
We use too much water, there's too many people.
What?
Too many people, too much water use, and it's out of balance.
Right. I mean, this area naturally would not have been able to support this many people without imported water. But with desalination, we have a chance to change that. But there's a lot of political resistance to that. Oh, and one more thing. When water comes in, there's a car coming. When water comes in, you don't want the small particles to wash into the bottom, which is kind of like your natural sieve, and because then that clogs up your filter. So it actually there's this distinct slope all over like West Torrance, and here you're going to see these spreading grounds, and they all have roughly the same angle slope. And that's so that as the particles go down, the fine particles will like lay on the slope instead of getting to the bottom and clog up the filter. But even then, you have to do maintenance on these things, and that's why when you go down there, you're gonna see a ramp where they can take a truck in and then haul that debris and that fine layer out, so that it can continue doing what we need it to do.
And where does that debris go?
The debris probably gets landfill. It probably goes in the garbage. I'm not sure. I would think it goes in garbage.
One question. There's a place over on the south side of the Lama Mall. There's a big pit right across the street from the marsh. Is that like one of these?
Yep.
Okay. And they also have a lot of other stuff that's going on.
Right. So we have what's called a hanging aquifer in the South Bay, and the hanging aquifer is the layer of, it's the water table above the clay layer And then there is the deep aquifer that we draw our drinking water from. And so when we have these injection wells, they're deep enough to go to the top of the second aquifer. And all these spreading ground push the water into the top hanging aquifer. And we would not, and there's no way that we're going to dip a straw or a well and put that into the deep aquifer, because you are not allowed to put anything in the deep aquifer that is not drinking water quality. And while this water is clean enough to water your trees, there's like no guarantee anyone can dump anything in this at any time.
I mean, it's storm water, so it's everything from off the streets, right?
Right.
So you don't know. I mean, there's that 1/4 inch that goes, but the rest of it, there's still stuff in it. So,
Yeah, exactly.
so it's okay.
Do you drink tap water?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So
It's the
tap
cleanest
is
water.
okay.
Oh yeah. If you look at the assays, it's cleaner than the stuff that can be bottled.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Interesting. And you don't need a filter on your sink or you.
I use a Brita because I don't like the chlorine. The charcoal gets rid of the chlorine.
Okay.
But you know, if you don't want to do that, just put it in an open pan overnight, and the chlorine evaporates out, and it tastes fine.
That's a good tip. We can drink our tap water, and Grace just uses a Brita to get the chlorine out. If you don't care, then she's saying it's cleaner than a lot of the bottled water we buy. So that's a great tip.
In Europe, the environmental movement in Europe is really trying to get people out of the house.
What is this called again, Grace? What is this called again?
Spreading ground.
Spreading ground. So all along this whole
See it from the other side there?
fenced area that you could be walking down the street here and you would never even know it was here. They did a nice job camouflaging it.
So this is the ramp. This is the ramp that they use to go down there and service. This is the ramp they use to service and clean out the debris. And you can see that we have a lot of volunteer plants and trees that just love how much water there is flowing under here. And then you can also see the very distinct slope that's required to make sure it doesn't, like clay doesn't build up at the bottom.
Really, there's quite a slope there.
Yeah. And so, like after an inch of rain, I've run over here to look, and overnight there's like almost no standing water. So it's sized, you know, as small as it is, it's sized okay. Unless we get an atmosphere where we get down 3 or 4 inches. Yeah, exactly. But I was pleasantly surprised because I looked at it and I go, it's not been cleaned up. And I run out after.
Interesting.
Morning after rain, and it always seems
It's just a big green grassy area that is collecting water. It's kind of hard to see with this iPhone wanting to
if there wasn't an emergency,
focus on the fence, trying to wiggle it around so you can see it a little better.
run pumps. They could use a sewage and they could run it uphill.
There we go. So you can see it's just like a big
Highly localized
grassy area.
as long as it's not broad river, right? Everybody's putting it. Right. And because we have a hybrid system, we have the resilience. We have that kind of resilience from having a hybrid system, in that we could just run the pumps more, even if it's not quite the first 1/4 inch first flush. We have the pumps, and we have the fuel.
Emergency use,
Yeah. So
Can I just, so the water that goes down here goes into that hanging aquifer,
yes,
and they tap that with wells,
no,
No.
we don't drink from it.
but
It just goes out to the ocean.
it just goes to the ocean.
Mhm.
The wells
Slowly.
are going down to the lower aquifer,
Mhm.
and that's what we drink.
The deep aquifer. We drink from the deep aquifer.
Great. What is this called again?
It's called a spreading ground or percolation pit.
Thank you. And so the point of this is just to keep the water away from everything else.
Right, so that we're not getting the pollution running into the ocean. It runs into the soil here.
And that filters the air.
Right. And then it will flow underground until we're like at the top we were at 100 feet, and I think here we're like at 60 or 55 feet. And then it'll just keep flowing downhill slowly towards the ocean.
And do they test it when it gets to the ocean? Do they test to see if it's good?
Because we never drink from it, we don't need to test it, and we don't. But for the aquifer that we do drink from, you betcha, we test that pretty often.
I used to work for, I didn't work for them, but Heal the Bay, and I was on their speakers bureau. And I just want to mention two things. Heal the Bay tests all the swimming beaches,
Yes,
but that's just for,
that's just the general bacteria
Right.
levels on the beach.
coliform. Yeah.
and then also Heal the Bay is the one that sponsors those,
Right, and they use the same stencils everywhere.
Right, they do. And the thing is, it's
It tells
just a
people.
reminder. It's not
just a
gonna go into
reminder,
depth.
right.
It's just, and I have seen painters dump paint.
I know.
So
And that's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
But there's no way to know where, like, if it goes in this one here, where it goes into the ocean compared to, like, if it goes into the Torrance one, where that goes into the ocean.
Exactly.
It's just
Our
nature.
our hanging aquifer is connected in some spots,
Okay.
but we're not drinking from it.
No. Put the fish in.
Yes, yes. And they're also drinking from the deep aquifer as
As it flows out too.
Through soil?
Mhm.
Yeah, so it gets filtered in a way.
It does, and then there are bacteria. There's bacteria in the soil.
Yes, it
that
eats it.
breaks up some of the stuff, and then some of the heavy metals can get sequestered in plants, like I showed you. Okay.
So how is our deep aquifer through his level, and what is he expressing that?
Oh, a lot of people have been asking, like, how our deep aquifer is replenished, and it's replenished in spreading grounds up in the foothills. Because most of the LA basin has that fine clay layer, we have a hanging aquifer, and there are only a few places that are not in the foothills where you can where you have like alluvial soils all the way down to the deep aquifer. And if you look at the slide deck that I gave you, one of them was, I think, Del Rio, which is near Montbello. So it's near, maybe we should get off to the side so these people. They're parking. Okay, so over by Del Rio, it goes, whenever there's like an alluvial river channel, it's cutting all the way through. And in that area, it cuts deep enough to go into the deep aquifer. And then over by Inglewood, have you ever noticed how there's like a slight hill going up to Inglewood? It's called the Inglewood Rise. And it rises because, well, tectonic forces, it creates a little hill. And there's a rupture in the bedrock there and in the soil layers above the bedrock that you could percolate down to the deep aquifer over by Inglewood. But you wouldn't want to because that soil above it is too polluted. So one of the League of Women Voters volunteers in this area, Lisa Pasquina, and she's a retired groundwater manager and we have another one over in the Whittier area who's currently a groundwater manager. And they tell me that the LA Basin is pretty much tapped out for the spreading grounds that go into the deep aquifer. All the areas that are clean enough and geologically suitable, most of them have already been developed as a spreading ground and are in use. However, we have to keep maintaining it. And one of the problems that we have is people love the environment, and I'm glad that they do, but they haven't updated their priors. So Arroyo Seco, there's a group of anglers that want the Arroyo Seco River to stay wild. And the spreading grounds over by Arroyo Seco take water that comes off of there, puts it in a spreading ground, and then returns the excess back into the river. But if they're successful in capturing a lot of the water, that means that there's not enough above ground water to sustain salmon year round. And these sport fishermen they deeply care about the health of the river. They don't want the spreading ground over there. So, and remember when I was talking about maintenance, it costs money. So up in Arroyo Seco, that spreading ground is not being used, and it has opposition by ratepayers that don't want to pay for the maintenance, and it has opposition by anglers who want the river to remain wild. And the problem with that is, like, we're all linked, not just hydrologically, but we're linked socially. This whole area, we have a backstop. Our backstop is metropolitan water, right? Metropolitan water exists to bring us imported water, imported from outside of our basin. And so if our wells are running low, we just buy it from metropolitan water. What happens when metropolitan water does not have water to sell us? Metropolitan has water from the State Water Project, which comes up from the Sacramento Delta. And because of Central Valley, farmers have been overpumping their aquifer, so the State Water Project aquifer has buckled so much that it can only be run at 80% capacity. Because the groundwater table has sunk so much. Okay, and then for the farmers, there's a Kern canal, and they have overpumped that so much it can only be run at 60% capacity, and that capacity keeps dropping. And then the Delta people are really upset because they think that we're bleeding the Delta dry. Now, when we say that on average, our region has 3 pillars. We're roughly 1/3 Colorado River, 1/3 State Water Project, 1/3 local supply. And recycling is now like up to 9 or 10%, and it's climbing, which is great. But we have to prepare for the end of Colorado River water. If the Cal water fix does not happen, and
How about we move to the parking lot?
yeah, if the Cal water fix does not happen, we have to prepare for the end of the State Water Project as well. So if we have to be water independent of the politics that's happening upstream from us, we should do our part. We should conserve our indoor water use. We should capture rainwater as much as possible to deep water our trees, get rid of our lawns. And we have to recycle. And we are building recycling plants. When you recycle your water, you're never going to get more than 95% efficiency. So you have to develop a water source that is independent of recycling, independent of whether or not you have a wet or dry year here, and that is why water managers are looking at desalination. And also there's this thing called the California Great Shakeout, where it's an experiment. It's a computer experiment to see what would happen to California's infrastructure if we had an 8.0 or a 7.5. And so one of the things I said is that we have to prepare for 18 months without imported water. And we are only capable of storing 6 months of water on this side of the mountain passes. So, and that's another reason why, it said, it would take us 18 months to 18 months to connect to one source, and it would take us 3 years to connect to another source. I can't remember which one was which. But if we were to have a major earthquake, that's another reason why people want desalination, because as expensive as it is, as much energy as it is, it's a resilience move. And I know right now it's politically unpopular. I'm hoping to change that. Any other questions?
With our help.
Yes.
We have
And
going to be a huge debate.
another thing is that The LADWP is Water and Power, and their water comes from the Owens Valley, and because they've dried up the Owens Valley, it's just horrible what they've done to it. They're being required by the courts to leave more water there in the Owens Valley. So LADWP is expecting to buy water from Metropolitan Water to make up the shortfall for that. And then the Colorado River is suffering more from climate. Well, one, it was over allocated in the first place, but it's suffering more from the climate change than our water sources. And we have to prepare for the end of imported water from the Colorado River. And one of the really optimistic things that I read is that, you know, the water recycling plant over in Carson I was telling you about, they did a pilot program, and when they do the pilot program, they figure out how much energy it takes to run that system, and then they figure out how much it would cost, and then those are the cost figures that they use for their environmental impact report to get regulatory permission to build it. So Las Vegas, which shares our Colorado River water supply, has offered to pay a percentage of building that super expensive recycling plant in exchange for our Colorado River allocation. So, and so that's another reason, like when people say we don't need desal, we don't need to do this, you know, the people up in the mountains are saying we don't need to do this, return the rivers to wild, let the people on the coast use desal. And then like people at the Salton Sea says, don't take any more of the water, we're dying over here. Like everyone has a valid beef, and we all have to do our part. So, but it is like we're doing this, rather than go to court, we're doing this cooperation thing with Las Vegas, where we're gonna give them some of our, what's called junior water rights. A senior water right is you get the water before anyone else. A junior water right is you get the water only when the senior people have gotten their water. And because Las Vegas and LA have junior water rights, we're like, sure, you want to take our junior water rights and build us a water recycling plant that will continue working in a drought? Sure, we'll take it. So it's a cooperation thing. It's also a smart move on our part.
A big polluter?
Is what?
Isn't the desalination plant a big polluter?
Depends on how you define it.
Okay. Brine, ocean brine that exits the plant will be what's called 50 TDS, total dissolved solids. So your fresh water will be less than 1 TDS. And ocean water is like 35. It varies between 30 to 40 TDS. And the stuff that comes out of the desalination plant will be 50 TDS. And so if you were to put that in, you could mess up the ecological balance. And there's a desalination plant run by Poseidon in Carlsbad. And one of the conditions for the permit is that they had to have independent scientists take a look at that. And a lot of people cite her research. She's from UC Santa Cruz. And she found, well, first off, it's already a degraded site. It's a site that has had a once through ocean cooled power plant before. And that is a huge ecological disaster, and that's why we're, so using that baseline that they were putting the water out in that area, she found that before and after the desalination plant was in operation, the area stayed about the same, a little bit better. Biodiversity was already pretty low. What she found is that after the plant went in, the plants that could survive, the animals that could survive in that were actually more abundant and heavier than they were before. But that's not like a cause and effect thing. We're also running that plant less. So, but what the baseline is that it's probably not doing as much. And that whole area where she was saying a loss of biodiversity was like 600 meters square. And the ocean's pretty big compared to, like the ocean is pretty big compared to like the Salton Sea or the Sacramento Delta, which are already pretty big freshwater marshes.
But that still doesn't sound like something we want down at our power station in Redondo Beach, right? Like at the
That's an ocean-cooled power station. And not only that, it's an old one, and it's an old boiler type.
Yeah.
So, and that's another reason you do not, I personally think that we need to replace the ocean-cooled plants with modern closed system natural gas plants. Like the one over in the airport, over by the airport, it's called El Segundo Power Station. Mm-hmm. It's run by, I can't remember, it's run by like one of those mega international ones. There's a new technology called combined cycle. So the old ones you just burn fossil fuels and it heats up a pan of water and it turns a turbine. Mm-hmm. The new thing is called combined cycle. They actually, it's like an engine and it fires just like your, what is that fuel injection? So it's electronically fired so that it turns a motor. It turns a motor and it generates electricity that way, and then the heat from that motor, from the exhaust gases heats up the pan, and for 1 unit of natural gas or CO2 pollution, you're getting 1.7 times as much electricity as you would have gotten under the old system. So over in El Segundo, El Segundo Power Station, they shut down the ocean-cooled system, and then they put in a modern combined cycle system that has closed loop cooling, and they use recycled water for the cooling, and then it goes back and when you use the water that goes into cooling the plant, 50% of it evaporates away and 50% of it is returned back to the sewage treatment plant. So that's a really closed loop.
But in this case, we've got a power station that we've already decided we're not replacing with a power station, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to replace it with a park, and some people have talked about desalination, right?
No, there's not going to be desalination. The proposed plan is to build it in El Segundo.
Desalination plants, right?
The desalination plant is going in El Segundo.
If it passes, if they agree.
Right, it's not a done deal.
Oh, no.
But it's going to El Segundo right there. If it goes in.
It's over by the Hyperion.
People,
But I guess what I feel like is, if I wouldn't want it in my neighborhood, why would I want it in their neighborhood? Like,
where are we going to put it?
oh yeah, that's sort of what I'm asking.
El Segundo has said that they're willing to host it. And not only that, they're the logical place to host it because across the street from them is a water recycling plant that is not being used at full capacity.
Is that the little place?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. They built it large capacity, but it's good that we're using less water indoors, so they have less water to recycle. They only recycle as much as they have customers for, and they put it into the wells and they monitor the wells for salinity, and they put in fresh water of drinking water quality into the wells when it needs to, when the water table is too low or if there's too much salt. So they do that. Like, remember, update your priors, update your what is the right level salinity for the salt for Santa Monica Bay? Is it the ocean salinity that we have today? Is it the brackish water that the Spaniards, that the Indians, the Native Americans enjoyed here? Like, what is correct? Like, can we all just disappear so that it could go back to a brackish water marsh? Like, what is the correct level? And these are difficult.
Yeah.
These are difficult conversations.
Yeah.
They're very complex.
But there are discussions that do need to happen with people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like step back a little bit, say like, we have a problem. How are we going to solve it?
Right. So, and these are the things.
These are the trade-offs.
Yeah. And these are the trade-offs, and you take your pick. I mean,
Right.
Because you can't do it my way, only way.
What if, Grace, what are they considering? I mean, there are other wider issues that are equally difficult, but things such as reducing agricultural use by eliminating certain
Crops, like
crops,
almond
like
trees.
Almond trees don't need our water.
and rice and all the various
And
things.
alfalfa.
Yeah, that we shouldn't be growing in California. And there's also maybe something like, I mean, we don't like growth
It doesn't make
limits,
sense.
but should this area keep growing?
Exactly.
Growing, growing,
If they
we
sell
don't
their
want
agriculture
And what about powering the
It's not a food.
desalination plant?
Yeah.
Can they burn hydrogen so that they could create electricity or create hydrogen using renewable energy ultimately? Or do they have to build a fossil fuel burning plant that will be that way for the next, 3 decades or 4 decades?
And these are things that are changing all the time. Like for instance, the State Water Project is one of the largest electricity users in the state, right? And there are calculations that if you were to cover the aqueduct with photovoltaic panels, you would create enough electricity to run that.
Yeah. So if they build a plant that relies directly on creating heat by burning fossil fuel, it'll be difficult to be able to use like green renewable energy. So I mean, a lot of applications right now in industry, and probably this plant would directly burn fossil fuel to create heat and so forth. Can they electrify it or else burn hydrogen?
The desalination works on reverse osmosis, the exact same equipment that water recycling does.
So they can use all electric.
It's all run by electricity. It's all reverse osmosis run by electricity off of the grid. And they're going to put photovoltaic panels on top of the building. So they're going to close it in the building so that the noise won't. Construction noise is always going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But it's going to be encased in a building, so it'll be quiet outside. It'll be covered in photovoltaic, I think. But during the daytime, Southern California electricity grid has so much photovoltaic power that it's negative cost.
Yeah. So
Right.
we could.
So
We obviously need ways to store that electricity. And so all of these different things should be a part of the discussion about desalination.
Yeah, exactly. Because I asked them, why not build a plant that's twice as big, run at half capacity, but only during the daytime when we're awash in cheap solar power. And they said because there's so much public opposition to having it, so we downscaled it to we downscaled it from 60 to 20, so we're going to have to run it 24/7.
One reason there's so much opposition is they just hear technical solutions all the time, using more and more energy, creating more and more, without a discussion of the wider changes.
Yeah.
We have to include all
We
of
have
that.
to include that. And
Grace, I'm sorry. Are we going to miss out on a lot if we leave now?
the last part is to go look at the playground. Do you want to just go over to the playground and see the overflow?
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're in a
Saturday becomes a little more busy.
Yeah.
Grace, do you still need the slides? Does anyone watch looking at them?
Iris, just move it to the playground and then Iris can go do whatever with her friends.
Great. Raise your hand.
We do it so in a slide deck that I feel. Yeah. Okay.
We're on Facebook Live on the NRBBA's Facebook Live page. So we're live. And Grace, is this the last stop?
I think she said the playground was the last stop.
Okay, good. The one thing we know is that Dr. Peng knows a lot about everything.
Oh, especially this topic. I mean, this is everything. Without
Yeah.
water, we're dead.
Right.
It's
And so she can answer every environmental question we could ever think of.
yeah, exactly.
We might have to have a water walk too.
Exactly. Yes.
So now you can see we're going downhill. So this neighborhood is really, really hilly, which I'm guessing is why it was chosen.
Good areas to drain.
Yeah.
I love to wear cotton. Cotton in the years have less evaporative loss and higher yields. So GMO cotton and these packets of water that goes down into non-GMO. And not only that, not only do they packets of water, they can tolerate higher soil water. So they can water that is not good for growing any other crop except alfalfa, which is also crop tolerant. So alfalfa is just grown to feed cows, which then farm. Okay. So I think water that was at such low quality. I would rather grow cotton with it, but only GMO cotton can tolerate it. So that people with good water supplies can use it for food. So maybe like your kids came home with like a short version of that. I know it's a little bit more complicated. In the corner by my driveway. Yeah. The other day I saw a little green. So I'm like, come on, here they come.
Another runoff. It's just like parking it. It's like polywalk, you know.
Yeah.
I like the Simpson Oaks again, where they had all the little parks.
Sycamore Park.
Before we made universities monetize everything, universities used to develop seeds that were good for their area and good for their farmers. And they used to give it away without patent. And like, that's what the Gates Foundation is trying to do. That's what the Brazilian government is trying to do. That's what the ag schools around the nation are trying to do. Except their legislatures are forcing them to monetize and patent everything. Yeah. And so that's a systemic issue with how we fund education. But so that's how water and education are linked.
Well, we have a systemic problem with funding anything in our country.
Money. Runs the world.
But the industry's going to have
And so is our government.
There used to be an old couple, when I moved here, there was an old couple that lived down here. And they were one of the people that had raw sewage coming up.
Because this is the low point.
This is the low point.
Of this area.
And the soils. And when that sewage comes up through every drain, you know, you end up with bacteria in the soils, and it was just a mess.
Ooh.
So, but the old couple wanted to live here until they died. And their children made a deal to sell this. Rather than fix it up and sell it and have someone else live here, they decided just turn it into parquet and into an overflow basin. Wow. And so, you know, the low-lying area doesn't have concrete. You know, they dug up the clay and compacted soil, and they put in something porous, so that when there's like a lot of water, do you see how it comes in through that channel there?
Mm.
So it goes in and it soaks down here. And when we get a little bit of rain, it's a little bit damp. When we get a lot of rain, you'll see puddles forming. And sometimes
Is it coming from below? Like, because the water
it's running off and it's coming from below. It's just a low-lying spot. And when that happens, they just put cones and yellow tape and don't tell the kids not to play in this until it drains.
Is it a problem then with bacteria and stuff because this runoff stuff has chemicals, whatnot? And then they rise up in the soil. I know a lot of things rise up in the soil and concentrate on the top.
Yeah.
Salt has a tendency to do that, and I'm sure these toxins might
Yeah.
They need to test
So-
the top every once in a while.
This
I
is
hope that they're testing it. I haven't talked to the city about it, but that's a good thing. We might want to ask.
this is attached to the other one that we saw in Nelson.
So the water in this neighborhood run into here, and we have standing water sometimes. And when the water can't flow into there, sometimes it backs up into here.
So what is that?
But I don't know if it's done by
But they're
design or
they're
what.
attached.
Everything is attached hydrologically underground.
So what is this called then? It's a park.
This
I
is
know it's
called a parquet.
No, I know,
This is
but I
called-
mean, in terms of the hydrology, this is.
I would call this like a water garden, you know, like that, because that's where water is going to be like spreading.
But it is like a filtration, right?
Yeah, it goes through all these wood chips, and they periodically scoop out the wood chips and put a clean layer down. But I don't know if they test the bacteria. That's something we should probably ask the city
Right, you know,
about.
stuff that might be on the streets from cars.
Yeah,
Benzene even.
but they periodically scrape that off and put in new ones. So hopefully the kids are okay.
You know,
Who bought the
Hollywood.
land? Was it the city or the water company?
The city bought it.
But for the purpose of
They knew that they didn't want another family to live on top of it.
because it was a problem.
But then we also solved the problem with the pump system.
You know about Hollywood Park, right? Whenever it rains, that place really floods.
And that's a hanging aquifer there.
Dr. Peng, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this with us. I mean, it's so important that we learn about our community, and you are clearly the expert, so we really appreciate your time today.
Okay, I think I talked too long.
Water.
Yeah.
Thank you.